So today, I thought that I would answer some questions that people have been asking lately. One of the things that happened this weekend, my wife and I had the opportunity to go visit some friends for a birthday party, and obviously, landlubbers don't really, understand the whole idea of sailing offshore. They immediately think that the worst is going to happen, that when you're sailing offshore, there are always huge waves, big seas, and monster winds, and that it's exceptionally dangerous. And then when they hear that I'm planning on sailing all the way around the world on a relatively small boat. Now, let's just be honest. It's a small boat. 27 feet is small. And then you try to explain to them that this boat was made to do that it's built for sailing offshore, that it's a sturdy vessel, even though it's small. They still look at you like you're crazy. They really don't believe what you're telling them. And I can understand that. However, I wanted to go ahead and chat with you all about that. Now, some of you I know are longtime offshore sailors, and you understand these things. So this video is perhaps for those people who are not and who are confused at the whole idea. One of the first things that they ask me almost every time is why? Why do you want to sail around the world? That's number one. Number two is, why do you want to sail around the world on that tiny little boat? To answer the first question, why do I want to sail around the world? I don't know. It's something I've always wanted to do since I was a little kid. Why do people climb mountains? Why did I hike into the Grand Canyon every year for years and years? And once I started hiking in the Grand Canyon, why were we compelled to find routes down to the river that nobody had ever done before and rope up and have to go down cliffs and things? Why? We could have taken pictures from the top. We could have taken a drone to the bottom now. I don't know the answer to that. I think that some people are born with more of a sense of adventure, more of a something burning in their soul that needs to be satisfied with adventure. And I've always been that way ever since I was a small child. Usually I would drag my brother along with me on most of those adventures, and he was a very good calming effect for me. He helped me to see maybe the smarter side to things. However, I have sailed offshore, like I've said before, right around 100,000 miles offshore. And I've had people look at me like I'm crazy when I say that, too. But understand that for 10 years I did offshore deliveries to and from the Caribbean. And generally, I put anywhere from 15,000 miles offshore to 20,000 miles offshore just on those deliveries. Multiple deliveries back and forth to the Caribbean really adds up. And then on our own boat, we sailed a long way. The last voyage we did was 10,000 miles on its own, across the Caribbean, through the canal, 38 days offshore to Hawaii, and then 28 days from Hawaii to Washington State. There are people that sail because they like the lifestyle. They like the boat, living on the boat. The adventure is constant when you live on a boat. If you're anchored out every night, and I mean living on a boat anchored out, not sitting in a marina, although that has its own adventure. But if you're anchored out all the time, a normal night can be waking up 3 or 4 times to check your anchor, to assess what was that sound I heard outside. things like that. I think that adventure alone is part of the reason that I like to sail. However, I'm a little bit unique when it comes to the sailing community and the cruising community. Most of those people like to get to where they're going, but the offshore passage itself is a burden. It's not something they look forward to. It's something they're nervous about. They're very uncomfortable when they're out there, and they're just counting the days till they get to shore. My family, almost all of them, are also that way. My daughter is really the only one who, when she gets offshore and she can't see land, she starts to relax. She starts to get into the groove of things and feel like she's in her element. Now, she still was looking forward to Hawaii long before the 38 days were up. However, and I'm not kidding when I say this, had I had my way, I would have just kept sailing all the way to Washington. I could have bypassed Hawaii at 38 days and been happy to keep going. I can't explain it. I love being out there. I love being on the water. I love the feel of the boat in motion. I love the excitement when the wind picks up and I have to reef the sails. Don't get me wrong, I love, love, love it when the wind is off the quarter and the boat is just hauling along on an almost flat sea with 10 to 15 knots of wind maybe blowing. I love that. I love those days. I'll sit up on the bow and just stare at the ocean for hours. I love the night watches. I love to go out and see the stars in ways that you've never seen them before. So for me, this voyage around the world is truly a voyage. I'm not doing it to see more islands. I'm not doing it for, the experience of landfalls. I'm doing it for the voyage. I'm doing it because I want to go all the way around the world and see the oceans. But the next question was, why are you doing it on such a small boat? Isn't that more dangerous? And that's a fallacy. And I might get some comments from all 4 of you. I know there's more than 4 now. Thank you very much for subscribing. We've got 300 and something subscribers. I never thought that would happen. By the way, I can monetize my channel once I reach 1,000 subscribers. That might happen in 10 years. I don't know. I'm not worried about that. That's not really why I do these videos. I don't do them to make a living doing videos. If that ever happened, that would be great. But I'm really doing this more to share with my grandchildren and all my friends and my family. I don't have any grandchildren, by the way, yet. But that's part of the reason I wanted to do this. I want to be able to have them watch it someday. But I digress. Small boats are not inherently more dangerous than larger vessels. Plenty of large vessels have ended up at the bottom of the ocean. Any boat out there can sink. I might get some comments, what about a catamaran? They never sink. Well, that's not true. There are catamarans that have sank too. It is much more difficult to sink a catamaran, but if you turn a catamaran turtle, you're basically in a life raft at that point. So, my point is, it really isn't the size of the vessel. It's the type of vessel. It really is. Now, there are people that are circumnavigating in what, in my opinion, they are not offshore boats, and they really, I would never personally take them offshore. There are certain brands of boats that I would not deliver offshore from the U.S. to the Caribbean when I was asked. I turned down multiple deliveries. And then again, depended on the direction. If they wanted to sail to windward from Norfolk to the Virgin Islands, and it was a older Jeanneau or something like that, and it was in November, the end of November after hurricane season, but right when all the winter storms are kind of ramping up, I would probably say no. But that same vessel going from St. Thomas to Florida or to Norfolk at the right time of year, I'd absolutely do it. It's a downwind run, and I did do that on an older Jeanneau that didn't even have an autopilot one time. And it was a great trip. I'm not saying that those boats can't even sail around the world. The milk run is really a milk run in a lot of cases, but you never can guarantee that you're going to have wonderful weather the entire way around the world, obviously. This boat, however, regardless of its size, is built like a brick shithouse. Pardon my French. But it really is, I'm amazed the more that I work on this boat, and I've basically torn it all the way back to the hull in a lot of areas. It's built very strong. It has lap strake built into it, which increases its rigidity of the hull. The hull shape alone is very sea kindly. It's a perfect boat to do this. And a smaller boat on big seas, in some ways, there are people that say that they're actually even safer. If you consider that if you had a cork on the ocean, the waves are all giant, but the cork stays on top. The cork just moves around, stays on the top of those waves. Now, I'm not going to oversimplify it and say that a small boat is just like a cork. It's not. You can have a huge giant wave that breaks over the side, turns this boat over, rips the mast off. In my opinion, it probably wouldn't sink unless I'm in hurricane type conditions. What sinks boats offshore is lack of preparation and bad seamanship. I'll repeat that. What sinks boats offshore is a lack of preparation and a lack of seamanship. What are the differences between those two things? Lack of preparation is you have not done everything before you left land and headed offshore to make your boat a safe offshore vessel. How am I doing that on MiG? I am doubling up on a lot of systems. What knocks a mast down? Usually, actually, it's the loss of a headstay or the loss of a backstay. Those are the two standing rigging that if they fail, your mast goes down. So what am I doing on MiG to mitigate that? I have redesigned the boat into a Solent, and so it has two headstays, essentially. The backstay, instead of having a split backstay, I will have dual backstays. Now, there are areas in both of those that if one thing fails, both go down. I realize that. Both backstays will be connected at the top at the same point. So if that point fails at the top of the mast, you still lose your rig. But obviously I know that, and I will make sure that that is beefed up. The same with the headstay. Could something happen that both headstays were lost? I suppose. I can't really imagine that situation the way I've designed it, but it could happen, yeah. What would happen with this boat if it lost the mast? Well, it's a deck step mast. I know there are people that don't like deck step masts. Our last boat also was a deck step mast. The good thing about that is generally you just lose the mast. It doesn't rip a giant hole in the boat unless the mast ends up in the water and then beats a hole in the boat, which could happen. But yeah, it's a situation where you look through all of those things in your head and through your experience, which I have a lot of, and you determine, have I gone through every single system on this boat that keeps the boat afloat and assured myself that it's not going to sink us. So that's why I've chosen certain things. That's why I've chosen a flax packing gland instead of a dripless seal, even though dripless seals are very safe, and I could probably sail all the way around the world with a dripless seal and never have an issue. if I did have an issue 3,000 miles offshore, it could sink the boat. So it's a very simple thing to put in a flax packing that I can pack myself and that I can always tighten up and stop the leaks. So in my opinion, that's just for me. That's a better way to go because it's something I can control. You know, we could go through all of the different things that I've done on this boat to assure that I feel confident in her seaworthiness when I sail offshore. I've eliminated through hulls. The 2 through hulls that I do have are in places that I can very quickly close them. They're both backed up with backing plates. Those through hulls are not a concern of mine anymore. Are there other places on the boat? What about hitting a container? People ask me that. I've heard that the containers are floating around all over out there. Well, they are. They are. You're about as likely to hit a container offshore on a trip across an ocean as you are hitting a refrigerator in the middle of the interstate. Could it happen? Yes. Do trucks hauling refrigerators or other pieces of furniture occasionally lose their load and people hit them on the interstates? Absolutely. It can happen. Is it likely to happen? No, it's not likely to happen. Would you not go on a trip on the interstate because you were afraid that you might hit a refrigerator on the highway? No, I don't think you would. Would you choose to put a great big ram on the front of your car in case you might hit a refrigerator on the highway and then tell everybody that's there in case I hit a refrigerator on the highway? They'd look at you like you're crazy. No, I don't beef up the bow. Now, I do think it's a good idea to have a crash bulkhead, and I've actually considered putting a crash bulkhead watertight compartment up here where the chain locker is. The only downside to that for me would be the way it is right now. I can pull the chain up under here where I'm sitting and I can keep the weight low. If I did that, I'd have it up a little higher in the bow, and I don't like all the weight in the bow. Would it be worth it to have a crash bulkhead on MiG? In my opinion, it's overkill. If I was sailing in the Southern Ocean, I probably would do that, actually. I may even put a crash bulkhead right here if I was doing that. But as I've said before, I'm not planning on doing any high-latitude sailing. I'm not going around Cape Horn at this point, anyway. I am going to go around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. That will be an adventure. But like I said, I believe that MiG is ready for that. I've done everything possible in my knowledge and in all the books that I've read and in my experience to make MiG a safe offshore vessel. And the bones were already there. This boat was designed to do that very thing. What's the difference between preparation for your boat to go offshore, which we've discussed, and seamanship? The difference is seamanship is the choices you make offshore that guarantee safety and proper handling of your vessel for the conditions that you're in. Part of that, seamanship actually begins before you ever leave the dock. Good seamanship begins with choosing the time of year you're going to sail across a particular ocean, and also the weather patterns at that time, and choosing a weather system that will help you get to your destination safely. In other words, the first part of seamanship is choosing to never sail in an area that has hurricanes ever, in my opinion. I don't do that. I never sail in an area where hurricanes can happen at that time of year. Fortunately, all the way around the world, you can choose when you are in a certain area where hurricanes happen and when you'll be there. So the The whole point is you pick the times of year where hurricanes don't happen in the area that you're going. So that means when I leave here, I'm in the northern hemisphere, but I'm moving to the southern hemisphere on my second part of my voyage. So when do hurricanes happen in the Southern Ocean? They happen in our wintertime, their summertime. Where do they happen in the northern hemisphere? Our summer, fall, their winter. So that's why it's difficult to choose to leave the Pacific Northwest and Puget Sound in time that you can make it, because we want to leave here when the weather systems are good. We don't want any hurricanes, so that means we leave after November. Well, that's easy, but you can't leave in the middle of winter from the northern hemisphere, from high up in latitudes where we are right now, because winter storms can be just as volatile and dangerous as a hurricane. So I have to choose to leave as early in the spring as I possibly can, hoping that as I sail south, well, not just hoping, but looking for weather windows that will allow me to get as far south as at least San Francisco before I start heading toward Hawaii. At that point, the northern storms are generally north of me, and I can make it to Hawaii safely, even in the early spring. Am I taking more of a risk? Yes. Am I taking more of a risk if I leave in the winter time to go down there? Absolutely. And I choose not to do that. So that puts me at leaving here in March or April, and maybe as late as May. Each month that I bump it back from here, though, I shorten the time that I have to get across the South Pacific before their hurricane season starts in their summer, our winter. So that's part of the reason that since I'm leaving here, I'm choosing now to go to Hawaii and then to Fiji from there. There are other considerations, but that's part of it. I'm most of the way across the Pacific. When I get to Fiji, I can continue on. And do I miss a lot? Yes, I do. But as I said before, this is a voyage for me. However, I can always come back around and do it again later. So seamanship is choosing to reef early, choosing to make your sails small before the wind is knocking the boat down. It's choosing to constantly be vigilant with the maintenance of your vessel when you're offshore and before you leave. Checking your rigging. I have an offshore schedule for myself, and my crew will also be part of that. When you're on watch, you don't just sit in the cockpit. You watch the weather, you watch the sails, and you also listen for any new sounds in the rigging, anything that might seem a little different, and then anything that is suspect you fix immediately. You do not put it off, you do not wait, you fix it immediately. If you see chafing on a line, you fix the chafing. You put chafing gear up beforehand. That's part of good seamanship as well. Putting chafing gear in areas that you know that's going to rub. When you're sailing downwind, you don't let the mainsail all the way out so it's hitting on the shrouds. It's going to wear a hole in your mainsail if you do that. In a lot of cases in that situation, it's better to just lower the main and fly with head sails so that you don't have to worry about the chafing on your mainsail. There's numerous things that are considered good seamanship offshore. Those are things that a lot of them you can learn from books, from reading, but really the experience that you have offshore is what gives you the knowledge that you need to know what might and what might not fail. Now, do I have enough knowledge that I know every single thing that could fail on this boat? Absolutely not. As I said in another video one time, I'll do all of this work, and my first trip to Hawaii from here, I'll get to Hawaii with a list of things to fix that I never knew were going to fail for me. I guarantee you that's going to happen. I've sailed enough to know. Seamanship is also about choosing your crew carefully. Crew is It's better to go alone than to sail offshore with bad crew, with crew that wishes they weren't there, or refuses to pay attention to the rules. Obviously, interpersonal communications between two people offshore, you have to choose who that is. Would I ever sail offshore with somebody I didn't know at all? At this point, I'd say no. I would have to at least know them and know them on land before I would be willing to sail offshore with them. A trip to Hawaii, generally speaking, is a pretty easy trip. It's a good one to go with somebody that doesn't have lots of offshore experience, but you've spent a lot of time with them and you know their personality, and you know that together you work well on land. That's a good thing. Teaching them seamanship is part of your job as a captain of a boat. It's never their fault if something fails on the boat on their watch. It's always my fault because I failed to instruct them in that area, and so something happened. It's my fault. Whatever happens to this boat offshore, the buck stops here. It's my fault. It's never my crew's fault. I don't care what they do. They do it out of ignorance. Nobody's going to go offshore and do something that is inherently dangerous that they didn't know. I mean, if they didn't know that it was dangerous, that's one thing. But if they knew that there's a pretty good chance you're going to die if you do that, you know. And then seamanship is somewhat subjective. I see a lot of offshore sailors with lots of experience dragging themselves behind a boat while it's sailing, even with a crew. I would never do that. I look at them and I think, man, no way. Do I then judge them and say, well, you have bad seamanship? No, for me that's bad seamanship. I wouldn't do it. I would never pull myself around while the boat was sailing if I was offshore, and I would never allow my crew to do that. Now, there are other things that I see certain channels that choose, and they both, in both cases of the ones I'm talking about, Sailing into Oblivion is one of them. Great book that he's written, and a great channel. If you haven't looked into it, look it up. And then, of course, Eric Andreas, No Bullshit, Just Sailing. In both cases, they choose not to wear a harness when they're going up and not clip on to the boat when they go forward. And they sail in high latitudes. They sail in rough stuff. And I have no problem with their choice to do that. In both cases, they're sailing alone, and they have weighed the pros and cons of latching on when they're offshore. And their argument is sound for not doing that. Now, would I? I can't say that I would never go forward on this little boat without clipping in. My daughter's going to freak out if she actually watches this and listens to the whole thing when she hears me say that. But the truth is, there are moments when you're offshore where something has to happen right now, and you're better to get up there, get it done, and then get back into safety as quickly as you can. I've been known to do that, and I will do it again in the future, I'm sure. So I'm not going to be dogmatic and say that I would never do that. However, do I make a practice of going forward on my boat without clipping into a harness and jack lines? No, I don't. I do everything that I can to be as safe as I can. One of the things we will have are those ACR watch things that set off a proximity alarm if you fall off the boat. I think that's just, if you can get that sort of a thing, you should, because the number one scariest thing for me sailing around the world on this boat is that I would come up into the cockpit after my sleep and find my crew person missing. And that scares me to death. That thought scares me to death. Or that I would be on watch and I would end up in the water and watch my crew person sleeping down below and the boat sailing away from me, and there's nothing I can do about it. That little alarm sets off a proximity an alarm on the boat that everybody will wake up, and then it guides you back to the person that's offshore. And I think that having that is absolutely worth the money, and I will have that. Now, let's talk a little bit about safety as far as an electric engine goes, because that's a new thing and it's a new topic that people have raised. They're concerned for me because I've pulled out my diesel engine, and they're like, what are you going to do? How can you outrun a storm? Well, first of all, this little boat will never outrun a storm. I don't care what size diesel engine in it you have in it. I don't care how much fuel you have. Could you position yourself a little better, perhaps, with a diesel engine? Maybe, but it's marginal. If you're out there in a time you shouldn't be there and you're having to dodge storms, well, you're not out there at the right time of year, first of all. And the other thing is, you're really, the idea that you would get a boat that you can outrun storms in is a little silly. Now, I guess those fast trimarans and even the fast catamarans, they definitely can put a lot of miles between them and a storm if they know it's coming. And I guess in that case, that's true. This little boat could never do that. I don't care what you got on it. It's never going to outrun a storm. Now, do I dodge squalls? Yeah, and this boat will still dodge squalls. And generally, you're going to dodge squalls by sailing. You're not going to dodge squalls by motoring. So you have to have, part of good seamanship is having the ability to handle a storm, not a hurricane. You don't want to be there for hurricanes, but a gale. You're going to hit gale force winds. On a voyage around the world, I will hit gale force winds multiple times with this boat. Gale force winds used to scare me when I was brand new. Now, I've got video of my wife offshore going around the horn there of Colombia, wind piping above 30, big seas, and she's playing a game on her iPad. You get used to weather, and you also get to the point where you trust your boat and you know your boat is safe. You feel the safety of the boat. You know that you've got her reefed down to the right amount for that boat, and she's just clipping along in 35, 40 knots of wind. That's another reason to watch Sailing into Oblivion's posts. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. He absolutely is laughing and smiling as the waves crash around the boat. The storm tactics is a big thing, and there is no perfect storm tactic for every boat. Every boat is different. When I was sailing Sweetest Thing, the catamaran that I was a captain on for a while, and I delivered it back and forth to the east coast of the U.S. and then back to the Caribbean multiple times. At one point, we were offshore in November heading towards the Caribbean, and we were in 60-knot winds. That was the only time that my weather router ever actually got a hold of me and said, hey, write a letter to your family and send it off because you might not make this. And he knew what kind of boat we were in, and it was a Fontaine Peugeot, and it, it wasn't built for that kind of stuff. But I did know enough to know that a catamaran, you're gonna want to run with the wind. You're not gonna want to plow into the wind. You're not gonna want to heave to and throw out a sea anchor. So we put a drogue off the back and reduced sail to almost nothing and ran with the winds on our quarter, and she handled it beautifully. So that was the right tactic for that. The right tactic in our old boat, Wandering Dolphin, was also to run. She didn't like to heave to in more than 35, 40 knots of wind. She wanted to run. And so run we would. And my tactic with her was I had a Jordan Series drogue, to throw the drogue out the back and just haul ass in the opposite direction. If I wasn't going where I was supposed to be going, that's fine. I'd ride the wrong way until the gale was over, and then I'd make tracks back to my destination. On MiG, I personally do not have enough experience yet on this boat to know what the best course of action is. I think that it's possible that the best course of action in this boat will be to run. I think that there are definitely times where running with this boat will be fine with a drogue. So will I have a drogue? Yes. I also think that because of the hull shape of this boat and its heritage, that it's perhaps the perfect candidate for heaving to in a gale, like Larry and Lynn Party did. That's in their book Storm Tactics, which is, I highly recommend that book. He talks about that. It creates a slick. It's a wonder. It's like turning off the wind when you're offshore. It really is. It's quite amazing. And so I'm also going to have a sea anchor on this boat. I never had one on Wandering Dolphin because that wasn't our storm tactic for her. But I'm going to have one for this boat because I think that that'll probably be the best way to handle bigger gales in this boat. It may turn out that I never use it. I hope not. I hope I never have to, but I will have one. So that's also good seamanship. Leaving the dock with everything that you need in order to make that trip that you're planning safe. So I hope that answers a few questions that you might have about sailing a little boat offshore and why am I doing it? I guess I really haven't answered the why yet, but I guess if you don't know, you should look into your own life and maybe think, what is something I would really like to do, but maybe I'm a little bit afraid to try? And then go for it and do it. Next week, we'll be back to doing some of the videos on my preparation. We're getting there. We're getting close. It's about to get cold here in the Pacific Northwest, so I'll start doing the cushions. I'm about ready to start sewing those. The boat's really close to being ready to go, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I hope you stay with me. I hope you like and subscribe and tell your friends. It would be cool to get over 1,000 subscribers sometime before I leave. But if not, that's okay too. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll continue to do these videos regardless of how many people decide to watch them. It's okay with me. And I got to say, I've really enjoyed all your comments. Thank you so much for commenting. It gives me such encouragement. I haven't had any bad comments. I mean, snarky comments. The only snarky comment I've had actually is one guy telling me that I misspelled the party's name. I don't remember their name. I can't spell John Kretschmer either. His last name? Give me a break. If I tried to type that onto there, it'd look like something crazy. But I still like him. I still respect him. And he's one of my favorite authors. I don't have to know how to spell their name for him to be one of my favorites. So don't get into my spelling, for heaven's sake. Get into my grammar. My grammar's horrible. If you're going to complain about something, complain about my grammar. All right, y'all. See you next week.